Welcome, everybody. We're going to let everyone get settled as you come into our Zoom room. Welcome. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on No Drama Part 2, Going Direct. I'm Katie Frank. I'm the managing partner at ZingTrain. I'm going to be your host today alongside Lisa Schultz, our newest managing partner in the Zingerman's community of businesses. And then we've got some of our, and I'm the managing partner at ZingTrain. We've got a couple other helpers here on our webinar. Mara Ferguson is our keynote liaison, and Alice Rolfe-Chin is our digital marketing manager. They're here behind the scenes to monitor the chat and questions. We're coming to you live from Ann Arbor, Michigan. We'd love to hear from where you all are coming to us from into chat. So you'll find chat in the little bar on the bottom there. One benefit to doing webinars and having virtual offerings is we get to see where folks are coming to us from. All right. And if you notice any neighbors in the chat, make sure to say hello. All right. We're going to dive into good stuff here. A few housekeeping things to take care of. Regarding the format for today's webinar, we're going to be in conversation and presenting here for a little bit. Then we're going to have some time at the end for some question and answer. We'll be collecting questions in the Q&A section throughout. You can find that in the bottom, again, in the same bar as the chat. Feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the webinar by clicking that button. And we're going to do our very best to get to as many questions as we can today. But should we not answer your question, we'll be sure to get back to you with answers in the days to come. This content generated so many questions, that's why we wanted to offer this second follow-up webinar. Lisa, you are in high demand. So, all right. There's also closed captioning available during today's presentation. If you'd like to turn that on, Alice is going to drop details into the chat. You can find the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then the last item of business is that we're going to be recording the session. You might have already seen the little box there and you need to click on got it. And we're going to be sending out the recording in the next day or two. So be sure to look out for that in your inbox soon. It will also be live on zingtrain.com in our resources tab for all time, where you can find all sorts of free resources, including past webinars. All right. Now that we've got the logistics out of the way, I'll get into a little framing, getting to the topic at hand with a little background. So I started in our organization back in 2005 when I was hired as a manager at our bake shop at Zingerman's Bakehouse. I had moved up to Ann Arbor and I didn't know anyone in town, and I was excited to learn any and all things about what was going on in the organization. And I didn't always want to cook after a long day of work. And the Roadhouse regularly hosted special dinners, which offered delicious food and some learning about said food, two things I loved. So I had the chance to meet Lisa shortly thereafter, since she would offer me working during those special dinners. I'm really excited that Lisa is willing to join us to share more about the no drama culture that she's been working on to create at the Roadhouse. Lisa's going to be sharing how she teaches this at the restaurant. And while we know not all of you work in the food industry, we do know that you are people working with other people. And when people get together, drama can ensue. So I encourage you that while Lisa is sharing, that you begin thinking about how can you apply this into your specific industry and in your business. And of course, if you have questions, certainly please reach out either in the chat or email us after. We certainly love to talk. One thing that I didn't kind of connect is that, so I was a manager at the Bakehouse for 6.5 years, and then I joined ZingTrain in 2011 and have been in the managing partner role for the last, since 2018. So anyhow, with all that said, I'm going to get out of the way. I'm excited to pass things off to our, again, newest managing partner within the Zingerman's organization and Zingerman's Roadhouse managing partner, Lisa Schultz, who's going to be teaching us more about no drama. And I'm going to share my screen here so we can get into our slideshow. All right, Lisa. Oh, no, I'm going to do this next part too. All right. Just kidding. Just seeing if anyone's paying attention. All right. Like I mentioned, we had Lisa here in June to share the history of no drama at the Roadhouse, what it means, how it works, and to answer your questions. From your feedback, we can tell you really enjoyed getting to learn this as well. Here's a few of the things that you shared. So love some new techniques that you can use both personally and professionally. There's also language around drama was helpful. Hearing different ideas, lots of different really great feedback from this session. Love this webinar. How do I get it started? So that will be a lot of what we cover today. Some more details about how to get this going. So we've asked Lisa to come back to share more about this. What steps can you take to actually have people embrace no drama and follow a no drama culture? How can you coach people for it? With that, I'm going to hand things over to Lisa now, who's going to start by diving into first sharing a quick recap from the June webinar in case you weren't at that one and were curious about signing up for this one. A little recap before we get into more new information today.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me back. Very excited to continue on with the information that we talked about last time. So like Katie said, a little recap of what no drama means at the Roadhouse and what we teach our staff. Practice generous assumptions. So this is believing the best in folks instead of expecting the worst. We don't know always, and a lot of times not at all, what's going on in people's lives. So, sometimes folks are having a bad day. They just got a ticket. They just found out they're going to have to put their dog down. They just got in a fight with their significant other. You just don't know. So instead of just thinking that people are jerks, to try to be understanding and know that people are people and things are going on in people's lives. Stop, breathe, appreciate is a fun technique that Ari created. It's just short SBA. So we can just say to somebody, hey, why don't you just go SBA? You can stop in your tracks. You can go outside. You can, wherever you need to do it. But stop, take a deep breath, and appreciate those around you. It can be quick. It can be lengthy. It can be whatever you want it to be. But I guarantee after you give somebody an appreciation, you feel 10 times better and they feel good too. 3 and out rule is somewhat similar. So it is just finding 3 people around you and appreciating them. Again, this should be fairly easy, right? People are doing nice things. Hopefully people are doing nice things for you and for each other around you. So that it is just a quick, right? You can step out back and text somebody. You can just turn to somebody who's next to you. You can, walk over to a different part of the restaurant or your business and just say, you know what, thank you so much for what you did last week for me, or, having that conversation or giving me that compliment or helping me out with X, Y, and Z. And if you do that 3 times, you are bound to feel better. End each shift with thinking about one good thing that happened. So same thing, at the end of shifts, if I'm cashing a server out, and even if it's a particularly challenging shift, I try to say, what is one good thing? I guarantee, even if things weren't going that great, that there's something good that happened. Perhaps you made a connection with a new staff member, you made a connection with somebody, a guest, a first timer, something like that. So think about something good, and it's much better to exit your day thinking about something positive instead of leaving in a really crappy mood. Who wants to do that, right? So we try to encourage the positivity. Moving with pace is especially important in hospitality and in restaurants. I assume it is in most other industries as well. But we always want to be moving at a medium pace. So if somebody is moving too slowly, especially in restaurants, for those of you who do or have worked in them, if someone's moving too slow, you're probably going to run into them. If someone's moving too quickly and frenetically, it can be disruptive and can, again, maybe they're running into you. And that's not helpful at all, especially with drinks and food and everything that's going on. So moving with pace, moving at that medium pace all the time, whether you're in the kitchen, whether you're in the front of the house, no matter where you are, just making sure that you're staying at that medium pace. We practice open book finance. So we encourage our staff to come to huddles, which is where we practice that, and we review our financial information and other metrics that we're tracking throughout the restaurant and organization. And it's also a good info share, and so folks can stay up to date. So we encourage folks to come and know what's going on and participate. As well as using BLC, which we're going to get into a little later in the webinar, which is bottom line change, but short is BLC. and it is a recipe for change within the organization that we use for changes small up to big, any size, so that we use it a ton. It's very, very helpful, and we're going to talk to you all about it. Bubbling up is a fun technique that we offer folks. It can be kind of silly, but kind of helpful. And it is imagining that you have an imaginary bubble around you, 18 inches in every direction. That is your own personal space. This is a space that nobody else can permeate. So if you do have folks next to you or around you that are being negative or doing the, gossiping, it's not gonna, you're gonna say, that's not gonna infiltrate my bubble. I'm gonna stay positive in my own space, and I'm gonna bubble up. So you're not gonna negatively impact my day or my time right now. And we commit to doing 3 internal extra miles per day. Extra miles are just something little something extra that we do for both guests and for staff alike. So it might be if somebody's having not a great day, maybe you go grab them a coffee drink or offer them a cup of coffee. You might offer to do side work if they're not feeling well and they just might need to leave a little bit early. Again, maybe someone broke up with a boyfriend or a significant other, and so thinking of just a little something you can do to make their day a little bit better. So we definitely encourage at least 3 of those per shift. And going direct being one of the biggest ones to reduce drama. So if there is, interpersonal conflict, somebody said something to somebody that they hurt their feelings, somebody, who knows, there's all kinds of different things that can offend people. I'm sure you all can think of things that you probably maybe didn't mean to do in your lives or that has happened to you. We're going to encourage people to go direct instead of lots of other things that folks can do and you may have seen people do. So we're going to talk about what going direct is not. So going direct is not avoiding the conversation. Again, I know I've done this many times in my life. I'm sure you have as well. It can be awkward sometimes to go direct and to confront a situation again where somebody did something, who knows, like I said something a certain way, was rude, was pushy, was who know, all types of things I'm sure you can think of in your life. If you avoid having that conversation, you're probably not going to find resolution, and it's probably it's not going to be resolved. Going direct is also not holding it in till you get to the point of explosion, right? So if you're really, really you're like, I can't believe I can't believe she said it that way to me, or I can't believe she said that to me. If you're ruminating, you're thinking about it that day, and you're the next day you're like, oh gosh, I just can't get over it. I'm really hurt, or I feel disrespected. And you're holding it in to the point of explosion is not, that's not healthy for anybody. So I encourage you not to get to that point. Going direct is also certainly not gossiping. Or we use the terminology skunking, which I learned at a service seminar. And skunking is the opposite, right, of going direct. So it is talking essentially to, everyone else about the issue except the person that you should be talking to about what happened. So it might be, somebody coming in to work and again, instead of just going over to the person and saying, could we step out back and just talk real quick? I just want to address something that happened the other day. It would be, skunking would be going to their friend or whatever, however many other coworkers are there, right, and saying, oh my gosh, can you, this happened the other day and it's I'm so upset, I can't believe somebody did this, I can't believe they said this to me, and getting people razzed up, right, and it's creating this negative cloud, right? The smell of a skunk is, I'm sure you guys can understand, right? So it's putting out this nasty odor and this nasty environment, creating this toxic environment by going to everybody else but that person. So, and that is something we very much ask, especially new folks coming into the restaurant, just to make expectations clear that the gossiping and the skunking is not helpful. And therefore, then we say going direct would be the proper thing to do. So some of the impacts of not going direct. Again, I'm sure you all can think of these things in your own personal lives or things that you've seen in the workplace. But it creates a lack of trust. Like if you're not going to come to me about it, like what else aren't you coming to me about? Which, doesn't create a healthy work environment. Can lead to poor morale. If in the example of somebody skunking and going from person to person and kind of creating this like I said, toxic environment. I mean, it can drag people down, and it's also like what's going on here? Why isn't somebody doing the right thing, or is somebody not helping to remedy the situation? And it's the last thing that any of us want in the workplace, is to have a low morale of the staff. And I'm sure we all have seen when good people quit because of things like this. Again, when things don't get resolved, when we're not handling things the right way on an individual level or on a entire organizational or workplace level, and it gets to the point where people just get fed up and quit. That's certainly not what any of us want, especially in today's job market when we're a lot of us are hurting and looking for good people. So I know that's the last thing at the Roadhouse that we want, is for any of the staff that we appreciate and do a great job to not work there anymore because of something like this.
I'm sorry for the long lag. Okay,
Oh.
there we go.
That's all right. So other impacts of not going direct. I mean, it's certainly not fun, right? It's awkward, it's negative, and like I mentioned, when that skunking and that gossiping happens, it does create that negative, toxic environment to where if you see that or enter that day after day, I know from experience, I've worked in some of those types of cultures, and it's certainly not fun. And I didn't, I stopped working in that environment, in fact, because it destroys the culture, it brings it down, and it makes the workplace or that particular place someplace that you don't feel good about coming back to. And it's like, that's not what anybody wants for their place of business or their place of work. And we've all seen this before as well. Gossip just creates more and more of it. So if skunking is allowed and it happens continually or regularly in your place of business, it's going to just fester. It's just going to keep feeding off of itself, and it's just more and more is going to happen. The game of telephone happens, and then all of a sudden someone's like, I heard X, Y, and Z, and you're like, that's not true at all. Who's saying that, right? So like that's what we want to prevent. All right. And then relationships in despair, same type of thing. Excuse me. When there's folks on shift or in the workplace that don't have great relationships, I mean, it's not going to create the connectedness. It's not going to foster the go direct culture that we want. And that's not helpful for anybody. It's certainly not what we want for our staff, any staff in their relationships with each other. Okay, so the definition of going direct, we'll talk about that now. So speaking directly to the individual involved and expressing your concern while working toward a resolution. So the 4 steps to going direct that we have here in our organization. So number 1 is to actually go direct. So we'll talk a little bit later about the kind of some parameters around what the right place and time is for that. But it can look like, it can be on shift. It can be, hopefully talk about that in a little bit, but not in the middle of like a busy time period. But it can be simply, going to somebody and saying, hey, the other day when you made this comment, whatever, X, Y, and Z, whatever that was, it really offended me, and I felt disrespected. And going from there, right? So just directly hitting the nail on the head and having a conversation about what it is that upset you. That doesn't mean that that's always fruitful. So if that doesn't work, or you don't feel that the situation is resolved, the next step would be to put it in writing to that person, which sometimes that has to happen. And it's helpful to CC a manager and just to kind of let them know what's going on, especially if you feel like number 1 wasn't as helpful as you wanted it to be. So if there wasn't that resolution and you thought maybe that you could get there, which we all want to by, going through step number one, but let's say that again, that didn't work. The next step would be to put it in writing to the person and probably putting your manager on there. If that still seems like you didn't resolve the issue, come to a resolution. Putting it in writing and making sure, like I said, that you definitely want to then bring your manager in at this point and meet with a manager present. So that and this is something that I've had to do many, many times over the years, when again, these kinds of things don't get resolved by step 1 or 2. So it would be like a mediated session to where you can just say, hey, like you all need to air this out. Let's, take turns and figure out, what the issue is on each side of it, and try to figure out how to move forward with the folks. And if that doesn't work, which most of the time, but by step 3, we have found some type of resolution. But if not, then we would be presenting it at a partners group level. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've ever had to go there. I could be wrong, but I have not seen it go to that point. But if it really, really just, we could not figure out how to make it work between the individuals or whatever the issue was, it would go to that level to be presented at the partners group.
Awesome. Yes, Lisa, I don't think we ever have gotten to that point where we've needed to present at partners group. So we're hoping that the first 3 steps, some variation thereof, do work. So, all right. Next, you're like, well, how do you have a courageous conversation or go direct? And I'm going to get into that next. So I believe that going direct and having courageous conversations is a skill that is rarely taught. Having these 7 steps allows us to train on them, to share clear expectations, and to share as a tool when people are having drama or conflict. A lot of us haven't practiced, except when we haven't had many peer-to-peer interactions besides with our siblings, or when we first got a roommate and the bills were due, or who's going to do the dishes, and that doesn't typically go very well, and then we're feeling less inclined to have one of those conversations. And so giving people tools on how to have those peer-to-peer conversations can be very, very helpful. The first step is to establish ground rules and to share your intention for the conversation. I like to say, I want to sit down and talk and have an honest, productive conversation about what's been going on. And then I want to hear from the other person. What do they hope that they would get out of this conversation? And then we want to share some ground rules, like we're going to both have a chance to share our perspectives without interruption. We'll both have a chance to respond. Maybe there's no name calling. Maybe if a person likes to swear a lot, you could say, let's talk without swearing at one another. And it's better to get some of these things down prior to the conversation. I also like to share that I'm a note taker, and I like to take notes when someone's speaking so that I can really be in active listening mode. And I don't want the other person to be surprised and to feel like they're on a presidential debate where like people are like taking notes ready for their rebuttal. Like I'm not focused on a rebuttal. I really want to be in active listening mode. So sharing that so that they don't feel like I'm ready to come back at them. All right. Then when we share our perspective, we encourage you to use I statements. Lately, I've been feeling shut down, or when I hear some of the gossip, it hurts my feelings, or I've been feeling hurt. That's very different than you are being rude, you are gossiping, you hurt my feelings. When we use you statements, it automatically puts the other person on defense. And we can only be in charge of our own feelings and how we've been impacted and how we want to proceed personally. We can't control somebody else. And so that's where the power of the I statements comes in, where you can share your perspective, because it's your perspective. People while they might try to argue with your perspective, it's still you're coming from your truth and your experience. After you share, we'll get into number 3 there. We're going to let the other person share and respond to what you've said. It's active listening, which we define as listening for content and not waiting for your turn to talk. So you might go back and forth between these steps a couple of times as you share, listen, and respond again. This is really, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, it's a back and forth. You share your perspective, they're going to have their experience and their perspective, and you want to leave space for both of those. Together, we can brainstorm solutions for moving forward. This includes coming into the conversation with an open mind. So if you go into the conversation believing the only way this will be resolved if the other person stops gossiping, you're likely putting them on the defense. So talking about what could solve it, how can you continue to foster more dialogue? How do you both want to hear feedback from the other person moving forward? Because if you come in only thinking that, well, if this other person would just do all the changing, then we're going to be in better shape. That's not going to set ourselves up for success. So what are you willing to take responsibility for and try yourself? And then what is the other person going to be willing to try? And these are behavioral changes, so it's going to take some time. Then we can decide on a win-win together, something that you're both going to commit to doing. The other tricky part about this is that I can't know what all those things are in advance. This is going to come out in conversation. You might have some ideas of what you're willing to offer or what you're willing to try when you enter into that conversation, but you can't answer for the other person. And so while folks that really want to be prepared for the conversation, we can't have the conversation until we're together. Now you can be prepared in advance with some ideas, but letting some of that develop in the conversation can be really generative. Decide if follow-up is needed. You can decide at that time if follow-up is needed, and I would like to just say, decide that it is. You can set a check-in point for a week or two in the future. You can have it on the calendar. If things haven't improved, you don't need to ask for another conversation and get into that whole awkward, let's have a talk. It's already scheduled. And if you meet and everything's going well, then you can high five and move on. And this last one is important, not to hold a grudge. If you talk, people have agreed to work on their behaviors, holding a grudge is just freezing them in time, and nothing good comes of that. Be willing and open for them to change. You want to be open to changing your own behaviors. Your relationship hopefully is going to grow and change based on these new behaviors. And holding a grudge is going to keep us in a fixed mindset, and we want to think about a growth mindset. How can I be open to growing myself? How can I give space to the other person for them to grow and try new behaviors? And then where can our relationship go, our work relationship, so that we can get to hopefully a better place after having this conversation. All right. In terms of coaching someone to go direct, I am going to turn things back over to Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. That's good.
Yeah, and there we go. Okay.
Yeah. So when coaching somebody to go direct, which again is going to be necessary because if they just went direct, then you wouldn't need to coach them. So you're probably going to need to do this, which is very appropriate and generally very, very helpful. So role playing the 7 steps that Katie just talked us through. I can't tell you how valuable this can be. Because again, if people just felt comfortable doing it, then they would just do it and we wouldn't have lots of issues probably that can come up in the workplace. So I'm working with somebody right now from our HR department on coaching. So doing role playing around coaching and different, conversations on, employee to employee or like supervisor to like staff member coaching conversations, conversations with guests, but we're going to do a session where we sit down and we are going to have many of us there and do pairing off and talking about how effective it can be to do the role playing and getting people comfortable doing it. So I just highly recommend it. If not everybody is like super open to it, sometimes people are like, no, I got it, thank you for this like initial steps that you gave. I think I'm comfortable doing it on my own, which if people feel that way, that's great. But I would highly encourage the role play because it can get them even that much more comfortable and hopefully to a more successful outcome. I alluded to a little earlier with right time, right place, right people. So this is super, super important with going direct. When somebody finally feels comfortable and that they're ready to do it, in the middle of the restaurant at 8 o'clock, at a side station where there's, 15 people around on a Friday night is not the time to do it. And sometimes people don't realize that. Sometimes, they're like, all right, I'm ready to do it. Here I go. And I'm like, no, 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 not right now. Wait until it's appropriate. Probably nobody else needs to be around, I would think. And most of the time I would encourage that. And you go out back, it's just you and that person. It's after, it's not a time when someone's stressed out. It's in, like I said, in the middle of a shift. Maybe after the shift, maybe it's outside of work, maybe it's before a shift starts, something like that. But to really be cognizant of the right time, and the place you do it, and then the appropriate people, if any, are around with you. Make generous assumptions. So we talked about this before, but this completely applies in these go direct situations, and that sometimes these are misunderstandings. And so maybe when you bring up like, hey, like this is, what happened the other day, and I felt very hurt or disrespected by it. Sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I said that, and I didn't realize that it hurt your feelings. I'm so sorry about that. So same thing, right? We're not sure what's going on in people's lives. Sometimes people just aren't being mindful. Sometimes people are reacting because they do have a lot of drama, or who knows what's going on in their lives, that this may be affecting, right, in the way that they're behaving around other people. So let's give people a break. Speak with positive power of language. So this is really making sure that we're framing the situation through a positive lens. So usually the person is generally on the defense, and they're just like, well, they did this, and I know it was because they weren't paying attention or wanted to hurt my feelings, or we already have this beef. And again, kind of tied in with the generous assumptions, putting it through that positive lens of like, hey, who knows like what was going on? Let's get a little bit more information before we just come, we want to get out of that negative space and into a more positive one, and toward resolution, instead of just being, and holding grudges. And get help. And there are many, many times where folks either haven't been comfortable going direct, or the going direct situation wasn't as fruitful as they wanted it to be, or didn't help at all. And then the next step that I always encourage, very, very much so, is to have a mediated session, and to get help. So maybe it's more coaching, maybe it's more role playing of the 7 steps. A lot of times though, I found that it's going to be having a mediated session. So grabbing, I would say grab a manager, have somebody in a leadership role, that can be there to kind of be the go-between, and to make sure that the 7 steps are being followed, with another person there. So that usually we can find resolution from that point. A lot of times people just need to be heard, right? A lot of times folks are coming from one side, so it's just one-sided, and most of the time we know that the truth is somewhere in the middle. But having another person there can really, really help keep it to where people can be heard, and then hopefully again to find that resolution. So reminder that that not going direct can be a sign of tacit approval. So if somebody says or does something, and then you choose not to say anything, you're essentially saying that it's okay for them to have that behavior, or to speak that way, or to do that thing, or whatever it was that offended you. And that's not okay either. That they're going to think, well, I said it before, and nobody said anything to me, so I guess it's okay. And we don't want that in cultures either, in the workplace.
And one scenario I had when I was managing at the bakehouse, is that I was the bake shop manager, and I had an assistant manager who would work on my off days. And I had a staff member come to me and was like, on your days off, this is what the assistant manager was doing, and like with the, wagging their finger. And I was like, okay, wow, well, they don't act like that when I'm here, and I hear you that you're frustrated. Is this something that you would be willing to talk to them about? Because I didn't go there right away, but I did say, uh, I heard the first 2 times, and like the third time, I'm like, all right, I'm not gonna just listen to your complaints any longer. Like we need to take action here. And so the person didn't feel comfortable going directly to the assistant manager without me there or a third party there. It didn't necessarily have to be me. And so I went to the assistant manager. I said, one of the staff members is having some strong feelings about how things are going on the days that I'm not working. Would you be open to talking with me there? And they said, yeah. So we sat down, and I didn't do much of anything as it relates to interjecting. I just needed to be there to make sure that both sides had a chance to speak. And then if there were any times when the other person maybe wasn't understanding what one was saying, that I could, interject with kind of my take on that, or to help bridge the information. But for the most part, they were able to talk with one another with pretty good results. And it's almost like when at a family dinner, whenever you have company, the family acts a little better. And so when you have a third party present in a conversation, people typically hopefully act a little better than they might if they were talking directly with one another. So I don't know, Lisa, if you've had experiences like that where you've sat in, but you didn't do much, or maybe you kind of helped in a few spots.
Yep. Yeah, all of the above. It just kind of depends on, if people are staying calm and allowing, like you said, kind of practicing those 7 steps, being respectful and allowing each other to talk, and like you said, the active listening. And then I've actually had it the other end of the spectrum, where people were still very heated and very much not letting the other person talk and kind of yelling at each other. And that's where you come in, right? To where you're like,
Mhm.
okay, these aren't the ground rules, right? Let's get back to what we're like agreeing to here, because we
Right.
do want to reach resolution. We do want to let you get your voice heard, but this is not productive right now. So
Right.
yeah.
That's a really good point, because I feel like there's times when I can start to feel shut down in a conversation, or I can observe that the person I'm talking with is shut down. And that is not a time to like try to push through, because the biological response in our bodies is fight or flight. And so if you start to feel shut down yourself, or you see the other person feeling shut down, or they're shouting, that's a
Right.
good clue, some data. Let's reconvene. Like I'm not feeling like I
Sure.
can have a productive conversation right now. And
Yeah.
if we can reconvene tomorrow or the next day, I will come from a better place of understanding after I have a chance to really think about what you've shared. But trying to kind of like push through to finish the meeting, isn't going to be productive. And so just be open to non-closure and the fact that we might need to reconvene again.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. I am gonna get next into, because you might be thinking, okay, well, this all sounds good, but how would I introduce this to our team without saying y'all are a bunch of gossipers and creating drama? So anyhow, we have a process called bottom line change, and in order to implement a culture around going direct, we would encourage you to use bottom line change, which is a change management process that we utilize in our organization. And you'll see here on the slide, and we've got a whole separate workshop around bottom line change, as well as blogs and webinars. The quick version on how it relates to creating a no drama culture. We wanted to implement this at the Roadhouse. The first thing we did was to create our compelling reasons for why we wanted to implement this change. This is our why. You could basically take all the reasons Lisa shared and the impact of not going direct and turn those into positive, the more positive frame, but turn those into compelling reasons. So going direct leads to an increase in trust amongst the team. We're going to be doing the work to stop gossiping, which leads to better employee morale. We create stronger relationships. Our culture is stronger and continues to grow in positive ways. And if we're asking people to change their behaviors, we need to give them really compelling reasons to why we want them to make those changes. Second step there is to share a positive vision of the future of what it looks like after we have become a go direct culture. if we can paint the picture and tell the story of what it looks like, that this is how we can engage and encourage people to get on board. Step 3 is creating a communication plan to make sure everyone knows about the change or the shift in the culture that's happening. And step 4, making sure everyone knows about the change, give people time to ask questions, create the plan of action on how to roll it out, who's going to be teaching a class on this, who's going to be coaching people on how to go direct, how will we teach this to new people, what supports do we have in place. And lastly, step number 5 is to officially go live with the shift in the culture, recognizing it isn't going to be perfect the moment we roll it out, or really ever, but having the vision for what it will look like, we can continue to refer back to it and hold ourselves accountable to it. As I said, quick info on the process. There's a lot more information on bottom line change on our website and in workshops. But the question of how we would roll this out, we would use these 5 steps. And I'm sure that this was helpful too, as people could understand the context for like, why are we talking about this still? Or like, I don't feel like these are behaviors I have, but seeing, oh, well, this could have a really positive impact overall. People can hopefully see the benefits in that. Okay. I am going to turn things back over to Lisa, who's going to get us into the benefits of a go direct culture.
All right. Which I'm sure you can already see that when we address problems, issues, or concerns quickly, we often prevent them from growing. So that's uber important. If we can stop the like, hey, let's stop it right here. Let's, encourage people to just like nip it right then if it's appropriate at that right place and right time. Or maybe after the shift, and again, not letting it fester, not letting it get to the point where you feel like you're going to explode. It's hugely beneficial for the people involved and for everybody around. We are creating a culture of trust with one another, where we can come to one another at the first sign of an issue. If we are successful in getting to this place, and I mean, I'll just say that as much as that we encourage and coach and helps develop staff and all of these things, I'll just say we're certainly not perfect, and this isn't happening all of the time. But if you can continue to work on it, do the BLC, let the staff know why it's important, like Katie said, the context and the framing, and what good things can come of it. And then again, doing the coaching staff with regularity, it's hugely beneficial. And the entire organization or business or restaurant becomes stronger. You spend less time on the drama. It's less toxic. Hopefully people are in a better frame of mind. Morale is good. Focusing on guest service to each other and to our guests and each other, and you're just going to move forward in a stronger way. And people know what to do when they have an issue with another person. You're laying out the expectation. It's very clear. We help you in any way that you need help. If you feel comfortable on your own, please do so. If you want the coaching and the role playing, absolutely, let's do it. But it's very helpful to lay down that expectation right up front.
All right. And one other caveat, because I love going direct. I feel fortunate that we have this in our culture. And I also want to share when it's helpful from a leadership standpoint, when you need to be there as an ally, not need to be there. When you are encouraging a staff member, maybe someone has said something offensive to another coworker, make sure that as a leader, that would be a time when I wouldn't encourage a staff member to go directly to the other person if they have felt like a microaggression or something that is very, if they feel vulnerable in a vulnerable position, especially if you've got someone that is like that's white and you've got a person of color and you want the person of color to say, oh, go direct with the white person, so that can create some tension. And I would encourage you to be there as a manager to make sure that the conversation goes in a way that both sides can be heard, and that you don't have someone that has been offended or had a microaggression against them, and then they're in a vulnerable position a second time. Anyhow, don't make it worse by just like encouraging that, but as a support, be there so to make sure that everyone has their voice heard, and that there's respect in all directions. That is something that I've learned the hard way, and I think if you're not sure, should I be involved in that conversation, I would default to, yes, I'll be involved in that just to make sure that we don't have further ripple effects on something that could be very tenuous.
Sure. Yeah, that's good.
All right. We've got a handful of questions here, Lisa, that I'd love to pose in your direction. And so Larry had a good question. How do you implement, well, let me first, do we teach our managers to be mediators? And that question, I can answer that quickly. We don't, but I think, Lisa, you're talking about our Department for People is going to do some training around coaching, which might also be helpful, but it's not in the same vein as a mediator.
Correct. Yeah, there's different ways in which HR can help on that level as well.
Yeah.
But this was more still talking about leaders, but and some actually, I mean, it is applicable. It is go direct conversations, but it's more like teaching. The one that I was referring to, at least, is somebody from HR coming to help facilitate and come up with scenarios so that we can do role plays about having our supervisors having coaching conversations with staff. That's those types of things, or unexpected guest scenarios to where it might be like, whoa, like somebody's like a fairly new supervisor and all of a sudden they're confronted with something they haven't never dealt with before. So
Right.
just saying, hey, let's present some of these scenarios and do the role playing to help prepare you better.
Right. All right. How do you implement no drama with folks that are already in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So yes, we teach the information at the Roadhouse, at least. We do teach it in the introductory class, which means that when we brought the class out and started teaching it to new staff, we also needed to teach it to existing staff. And that is something that we have fallen a little short on. It's absolutely in for new hires, once they come in and they hopefully take the class within the first, well, hopefully a couple of weeks, sometimes it's the first month or two, but they get that information. What we haven't done recently is actually gone back to like the lead servers, or when we have department meetings every couple of months. So it is something that you will need to recirculate throughout the culture, not just give to new staff when they come on, to make sure that everybody is on the same page.
Gotcha. All right. Jenny asks, we've got some very independent and headstrong people who believe that, quote, respect is subjective and therefore don't approach these things with openness or compassion. I'm guessing that Jenny means the conversations. Do you have any tips for softening that barrier?
I would say, doing, again, like role playing, it can be talking to the person then that we're hearing is not approaching things in a mindful manner. I have to have those conversations, and sometimes they're just short coaching conversations. Sometimes they actually sit down several minutes or more, but to make people aware. And if they're already aware, I would just say, like, this is an expectation. I know that this might be something that you don't necessarily agree with, but because we are trying to create a more positive culture, and one where we know that some people are more sensitive than others, that it is important that we are being mindful in how we approach people, our tone, the power of language, all of these types of things. And so again, I mean, I guess you can say I understand that you might not agree with it, but this is something that is an expectation for all staff to follow.
Right. And I think when you focus on internal service, if we say that we're about great internal service, phrasing things like a real jerk doesn't align with that. And
Right.
so sometimes I think people aren't aware of how they're coming across. And I'm someone that can think something, and I've become practiced at, okay, how can I phrase that in a way that's not going to put someone completely back on their heels?
Yeah.
And I'm not perfect at it, but I will say that one thing that I work with other people that might speak in a very direct tone is, how can this be phrased in a way that's not going to put someone on the defense? How can we those all of those tips around going direct, how can we phrase something in a power positive way? It's not sugarcoating it. And also, we don't have like, what is the intent by communicating in such a way that is like, I'm going to knock you over by how direct I'm going to be? Like, this is not, who can have the biggest ego here? But instead, like, how can this person hear this information in a way that they might actually be motivated to change? But if I come across it like with a sledgehammer, they're not going to be excited or motivated to want to modify any behaviors. So, all right. Stephanie asks, if there are two people in managerial roles and the third person is not, what are some ground rules that would help provide equity in the conversation?
Oh, okay, sure. So if someone's having an issue with a
Yeah,
manager, and I'm like maybe doing the mediation.
I think so.
Okay. Um, I mean, I would treat, whether I think the ground rules still apply. So, it's still going to be like the seven steps, like everybody, making sure that you're using the I statements, and just I would treat them like, even though that's a manager, it's still somebody, perhaps we're all human, right? Perhaps they still said something in a tone or who knows what, where somebody was offended, and then it becomes the like, hey, I know you're a peer of mine. I know you're a manager, but somebody, they were upset with your delivery or what you said. And so they do want to, they aren't, let's just say, uncomfortable going direct with you. So they would like to sit down, which is great. So let's get this kind of resolved. And then once you're in that scenario, I would just recommend just treating, and it doesn't matter who it is there. It's like, these are the two people involved, and this is here are the ground rules we're going to have so that people can express themselves.
Yes, and I think a lot of people don't, uh, if I'm going to put my HR hat on, if we hear a complaint about, you might not think of harassment in this way, but if we are fostering a hostile work environment, which means I don't feel comfortable at work, that could be grounds for a lawsuit. And sometimes people are like, I just don't like working with this person and I'm going to treat them in this way. And it's like, okay, well, I want people to have harmony at work and go direct and be able to get to resolution on things. And also from a leadership standpoint, if I don't address the things, if I know about things and then don't address them, I open ourselves up for a lawsuit or for not creating a work environment that is conducive to being open. And so it's not just that I want to make sure that we get the resolution, which I do. That is the first and foremost, like, care and concern for the team. And also, if we don't act on these things, we are putting ourselves at risk.
Yeah.
All right. Martha asks, do you find that staff who successfully use the no drama tools are less likely to need to go direct?
Sometimes I guess it just kind of depends on the scenario. So, I mean, that's why we lay out the no drama work, is to provide staff with the tools, and hopefully, if they are using them, they are finding them to be helpful for them. But there's also, you're just not sure what can happen, right, between people, and so I would say yes, probably on the whole, they are better equipped. But stuff happens, and sometimes it's like, sometimes you're caught off guard and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody just did that or said that. And now it's, we might still need to go to, I'm not sure how to approach this one. I didn't see this one coming. I need some
Right.
help. So
Yeah. All right. And then Luis asks, what are some tips for going direct to your leaders or supervisors?
yeah, and that I've dealt with this one as well. um, I mean, I think, and I know I've mentioned it, but just doing probably like the role playing would be, I think, one of the more helpful things, because a lot of times in those situations, right, like people are, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, people might be intimidated, they're not sure how someone's going to react, maybe they're scared, you know what I'm saying, all kinds of different emotions come out. So I would either do the role playing to help somebody get comfortable, which again is usually pretty effective, or just say, you know what, I feel like might just be better, and maybe if you're more comfortable, let's just have the meeting together, and that's totally fine.
Yeah. And I often try to encourage folks that if you have a complaint about a manager or supervisor, really check in on the as it relates to, for us, our mission, which is like delivering the Zingerman's experience to as many people we come into contact with. Or I don't feel like I don't feel like we're meeting our goals on, for us, we measure on 3 bottom lines: great food, great service, and great finance. I don't feel like we're able to meet one of those bottom lines because of X, Y, and Z. So I always try to encourage folks, if they want to go direct to a supervisor or manager, that they are tying it to organizational values or organizational goals. So it's not complaining only to complain, but instead like complaining with, boy, I feel like this is really going to have a detrimental impact on the organization, or having trouble reconciling that. I think those conversations tend to go better, as opposed to like, you're not doing a good job. Just like when we coach staff on not meeting performance expectations, we tie it to job expectations. And so I find that tends to go better. All right. I think we've got time for one more question, and we will work to get some of these other questions answered. Thank you so much for so many great questions. All right. Jenny asks, can you recommend a good way to discourage overuse of the going direct method? I have one person who I can see wasting a lot of time insisting upon these go direct conversations about many minor things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Katie, maybe you can actually talk about, Joni and I were just talking about, but the 10-10-10,
Oh yeah.
or like the 2-2-2, I think is a good framework. If you
Yes.
Are you okay to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know the 2-2-2, but I know the 10-10-10. So with 10-10-10 is this going to matter in 10 minutes? Is this going to matter to me in 10 days? Is this going to matter to me in 10 months? And if I can answer, is this going to matter to me in 10 days or 10 months, then I will probably want to get it addressed. And I will say that when we say going direct, some of it is just in conversation. It just means that I feel some kind of way, and I want to talk to you about feeling some kind of way. It doesn't mean that we have to like sit down, set time aside, but really I do want to say, can we touch a base before the end of the shift? And then we go and talk about it. The thing is, we don't want to surprise the other person. So I don't want to like go to Lisa and say, hey, can we talk about this thing just because I happen to see you at Zing Train, or I happen to be at the Roadhouse, and like, let me spring this thing on you. That's never going to go well. And so I don't think that this is actually a waste of time. I think it's a good use of time, as long as the other person isn't surprised by it. But can you speak to the 2-2-2 quickly, and then I can wrap up?
No, I don't remember.
No,
I remember
okay.
Joni was talking about it yesterday, but that's why I was like, I think they're
Oh,
similar, but it's similar type of thing. Like if
okay.
this is gonna, be still
Okay.
on your mind, right? Like
Yes.
if it leaves your mind in 10 minutes, well, you probably don't, you probably
Yes.
don't need to go direct. If it, or it didn't bother you that much, or it's like, oh, again, generous assumption, like they were probably
Right.
just having a bad day. It's, not a big deal. But if you're
Right.
like you said, like 10 hours, 10 days, and you're like, oh, and you're
Right.
still thinking about it, and then you're to the point of explosion, like that's not good. Then
Right.
that's like a good framework of like, should probably be addressing that, going direct, mediated
Yeah.
conversation, something along those lines.
I always sleep on it before I decide to go direct, because sometimes I just need to eat or have some coffee. So anyhow, I want to say thank you all so much for joining us, spending time with us, asking us some wonderful questions. If your question went unanswered, we'll be sure to get back with you as soon as we're able. Thank you so much to Lisa for joining us. Thank you, Mara and Alice, for helping us out in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's conversation and what you might like to see in future webinars. So Alice, if you can put the link to the survey in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. We're going to be sending out the recording of today's webinar in the days to come, so be sure to look out for that in your inbox. And thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.